back again here for another edition of the program, and I'm afraid to mention the studio because I've gotten it wrong the last 3 weeks. John keep telling me, "Don't forget to say." I'm I'm, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to say,
It's allpointstv.com.
yeah. I got to start reading the sign, John. We had that other name so long, it's just entrenched in the back of my mind. I got to get in the front here, and and then that'll solve that problem. Okay, I've been arguing, not arguing. I've been going back and forth with all these Canelo fans. You know, this is 2 weeks before the biggest fight we've had in the last 25 years. I'm a boxing fan, and so I like to go and do the back and forth with all these fans that think that Canelo, that's the big fight. In case you're not a fight fan, they're going to have a big fight on the 13th between Canelo Alvarez and Bud Crawford from Omaha. And how many boxers we have out of Omaha? But we have the top fighter pound for pound in the world right now from that place. And this fight is very big. Everybody's talking about it. The momentum is now building up for a gate. I think Canelo's getting about 200 and some $1 million. It's 36 minutes of work if it goes the distance. And then Crawford's getting 50 million. And so this is a big fight, not just monetarily a big fight, but a fight that's going to decide really where the greatness of the fighters are pound for pound. Right now, they're saying Sugar Ray Robinson. I saw him in his prime, but I don't know if that's true or not anymore because these fighters have gotten bigger and faster and better over time. Robinson was great in his day, but I don't think if Crawford wins this fight, and I think he's going to win this fight. I'm going against the grain here, against the experts. It's going to be a no-brainer if this fight comes out the way I think it's going to come out next Saturday of next week, the 13th of September. And I think it's going to shock a lot of people. The world's going to be shocked. I'm predicting a Crawford victory. So all you fight fans out there, don't you think just because I'm here in the studio talking about the Constitution all the time, that's my only area of concern and interest. That's my major area of concern and interest, of course, is my field. But do not count me out in the boxing world. And I'm just telling you, I'm going back forth and all you experts out there picking Canelo. I'm just telling you right now, do not bet. One guy said today, I'm betting a house. And I was telling him I need a new house, but I wouldn't go. I would not go that route. That's just my, of course, that's just my opinion. I came today to the studio to finish a talk that I've had for the last 2 weeks. I've been getting sidetracked, and I have not finished up, but I'm going to finish up today. And this is Labor Day. I want to say first of all, I hope everybody's having a great a great Labor Day because this is a day to rest and relax with family and friends. Probably the last day you'll be in your backyard. I'll be in my backyard later on this afternoon barbecuing. And I hope all of you are going to have one of the great Labor Days of your entire life. And I'm calling in my article today on Facebook for the members of Congress to have a great holiday, and also the members of the Trump administration have a great holiday, and then get back to their job tomorrow. And the job of the Trump administration is to continue to work on and refine and lock down all the loose ends of the claim that's got to be made against these persons that tried to overthrow this government in this country, because we had a coup d'etat going in this country for at least, well, it really started in 2016. And I'm making some constitutional claims here that nobody else is making about what needed to have gone on but cannot go on now, because you see, here's the problem. There was a procedural condition that was in place had to be met, and it was not met while Obama was president. So that procedural aspect that involves him when he was president cannot be carried out now because he's no longer in office, and you cannot carry out the particulars of the impeachment now that he's left office. So the Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2 claim of the Constitution cannot be met now because you can only impeach while the office holder is in office, and once leaves office, that leverage you have because there is in left. It's left undone because the members of the Congress didn't do their job. But who's surprised about that? And by the way, by this being Labor Day, I'm glad for another reason why we're celebrating Labor Day. It keeps them at home, and we can now apply during the time they're at home the Hippocratic Oath in the political arena, and that is, first of all, do no harm. And while they're at home, they can't do any harm. So that part is also being fixed today by having Labor Day. But tomorrow, I did in my article, I called in my article today on Facebook for these politicians to get back on their job and continue to, those in the Trump administration, to get back on their job in particular and refine tie down the loose ends and tighten the loose screws and bolts to nail down what is really clear, and that is we had treason that was being committed against this country starting in 2016, and it continued particularly after Trump was elected in November the 8th, 2016. And then when Obama was there, from that point, the president leaves office on the 20th of January the following year. And so Obama was covered with what he was doing in his part of the this discombobulation and dismantling of our Constitution by this guy going against the claims of, let's see, what was it in 2016, 63 million people that voted for Donald Trump. And although he did not get the popular vote in that election, popular votes do not win elections, presidential elections in this country. And that's because the framers were not imbued, as all these politicians claim they're imbued, with this idea. And you hear them always talking about, we want to protect our democracy. I want them to tell them every time they say that to shut up, because they don't believe that. And even if we were intended to be a democracy, they would not be any practitioners of it, because that's not what you see them doing. They don't even respect the right of the voters to make the decision that they've been making. And you see that in terms of this gerrymandering that they're fighting over right now, because the gerrymandering is that the party that has won the most votes, like in Texas, the Texas legislature, where's the numbers there? The numbers are in the Texas legislative branch. I think it's 82 out of 150 Republicans in the House in Texas, to 62 in the House that are Democrats. So it's a large margin there. And in the Senate in Texas, it's 23 to about, I'm coming off these numbers here, but I'm going to be close. 23 to about 10 or 11, 12, something like that in the Senate. There are no independents in the state body in Texas. They either one thing or another. But they're fighting over which party is going to be in power, because the parties in power are the one that does the gerrymandering. And both parties do it, by the way. So don't be coming to me telling me about they're getting ready to gerrymander, because I tell you what they're getting ready to do in Texas, and you're not going to like this, but they're getting ready to gerrymander Al Green out of there, and they're going to gerrymander Jasmine Crockett out of there. They're going to draw those districts so that those two are gone. And that's going to really hurt the claims of Al Green, because Al Green wants to do a third impeachment of Donald Trump. And he's not there, he can't do it. And he won't be there once they gerrymander his district, because they're going to cut his district up so that he doesn't have that enclave to himself and that power center that he has in that one district. Let me say this also while I'm on this point, going to the what I came to talk about today. People think that people like Ilhan Omar will run for the Senate from Minnesota. She's not going to run for the Senate in Minnesota because she doesn't have any. See, people get confused, think she has popularity outside of her district. Her district is made up of Somalis, and she's running in that district. It seems like she has tremendous power. She doesn't have any power. She's running among fellow Somalis, because this country is still being divided up as it was in the past, when you had people going into, let's take this state right here, for example. The Hamtramck would be in the Detroit area, and that would be the place where the Polish had settled. You'd have some places, you could say Boston, that would be the Irish. You'd have, of course, you have Greek Town, you've heard of that, Chinatown. These are just groups of people that congregate in various parts of the country, because when people move out of their own homeland, wherever they go, they create a homeland where they are, and they pocket those places and so on. That's what you're seeing with Ilhan Omar. She's not going to be defeated in the district she's in, but that's not because she's doing anything. It's because she's running in a district that where the Somalis have come into that area, and that's where they are parked in that area. You can find some areas where the Senegalese are parked in some of the areas in Michigan, down Detroit, and you have up above Flint, you have going towards Saginaw, you got a place called Frankenmuth, and that's where they have the Bavarian Inn, and they have Zenders, and they have places like that. That's where the Germans came and set up shop. And so you have to think about that when you're talking about these persons that are speaking very strongly, and you think they have a lot of clout where they are. They are not. There's no clout this woman has. She has clout in her district because of the people that are in that district. She's Somali, and they're Somali, and we need to check on her citizenship status and find out if that's been cleared. Because if not, we can then look at deportation of this woman, because you don't have to be a citizen you can run we need to understand the people that are in the House do not have to even live in the district where they are representing. Just like Maxine Waters lives in a very high end, very rich. I think her mansion is worth $4 million. She's not living in the district where she represents where she, I say represent, but misrepresent the people in California. She doesn't live there. She lives in a high, exclusive, gated community, a home worth $4 million, and representing these people over here who are not schooled enough to vote her out, won't even live among them, and so on and so forth, and claim to be representing them. She's not representing them. They're voting her based upon the fact that when you get in these places here, they don't turn them out. There's a 96% recidiation rate for office holders. Only 4% of them are turning out when they're up for re-election because we get our finger frozen on the to the pen and writing the mark by their name. We can't stop doing that, and that's how they get elected. Once they get in there, it's hard to get them out. And it may take us to look again at term limits, which we ran to do when after Roosevelt. We realized we had to term limit the president because Roosevelt wouldn't leave, and so they went and passed the 22nd Amendment to make sure that would never happen again. We need to look at how we're going to limit these people who are going up there to Congress and staying forever because they're not doing anything up there representing anybody, and we need to understand what they're doing there. They're doing the country an injustice and a disservice. That's what they're doing. Let me make one other point before I run to my topic, because I got to finish it up today. That topic that I've had for the last 2 weeks, I've been running away from it and getting diverted away. So I'll make all my points before I get there. And that the last point I'm going to make is that we need to understand this guy, Cory Booker from New Jersey. There's a method to the madness of these people, but you have to be studied so you can follow what they're doing. For example, this man spoke in the longest filibuster of anybody who's ever stood on the floor of the Senate and to filibuster as he did. Now, I could ask, but I'm not going to ask for an answer, but I could ask, why was he up there doing that? He wasn't saying anything on the floor of the Senate. But why was he really interested in filibustering for the amount of time that he did? And now he's the one that is filibustered on the floor of the Senate longer than any other filibusters that has occurred on the floor of the Senate. Okay, your time is up. Here's a problem. Here's a deal. Before Cory Booker, Spartacus, they call him. Before he did that, do you know who had the record for having the longest Senate filibuster on the floor in the history of the Senate? I'll give you a guess. Robert Byrd. And Robert Byrd had the longest filibuster of anyone who's ever filibustered on the floor of the Senate, and he filibustered the Civil Rights Bill, and they got to erase that from history. And that's what they're doing. You see, I've been taking them to task publicly in my articles on Facebook, as I did today. And I wrote some things today on Facebook, and I wrote it to challenge every scholar in this country. They're not going to say anything because they're not on this level. And you don't believe that because when they give their credentials and give my credentials, they start talking about Eastern and people start running and laughing and all the rest of it, but they're not on this level here. And I proved it in what I wrote today and what I've been writing, and they do not answer what I write. They do not respond to it. And they will meet me with the same silence in my area that this polymath is met with silence. I'm not a polymath, but meaning a person an expert in multiple areas. But in the area that I am that expert in that area. And they're not going to say anything about what I write in that area there because they cannot challenge what I'm writing. I'm the person in that area. And they can take that letter along. And I challenge them publicly. They in my post, and they're not going to say anything. They're not going to say anything because they're not qualified to come behind and say anything. And I dare them to try. They're not going to say anything. I tell you that now. I've been calling them out for, I don't know how many years I've been calling them out on the air. And a lot of us on Rumble. and they're not gonna do anything there either. Okay, my topic for today, I want to finish it up. I was making the claim this is my third week in this topic, and the topic really today is that this war is not. Everybody says Putin. This is not Putin's war. This is NATO's war. And I know a lot about this area, but I would be foolhardy to make the claim that I'm the expert in this area, that others are experts in this area, although I've checked behind them and I know the things that they know in the area. But the experts in this area, there are two of them. Jeffrey Sachs at Columbia University, and there's no doubt about his expertise in this area, no question about it. Does not mean that I take his word for anything, but I do check behind him, and I can vouch for the things that he says. But he's a scholar in this area, above my scholarship in this area, and I have to give him credit for that. But that does not mean that I go in there as a novelist in that area. I do, in fact, read what they recite, and when they give me a source, I go and read the source. And I have a lot of respect for Jeffrey Sachs in this area and plus I have a lot of respect for him because I have respect for anyone that is a independent thinker, independent of the two parties, and doesn't come out taking partisan positions because they want to camp in one of these parties or the other party and make their conclusions based upon the camp they're in. And he does not do that, and I respect him for that. So in the area of the politics of Eastern Europe, and that I have to give Jeffrey Sachs the upper hand here. But there's another expert who is in fact complementary to Jeffrey Sachs. I don't think he is as gifted in the area as Sachs is, but he's certainly very gifted in this area. And that person works at the University of Chicago, the University of Chicago, and that person is John Mearsheimer. And Mearsheimer is also an expert in this area, and I would not want to, I don't take his word for anything either, but I would not want to sight unseen challenging things that he says because that's his area. And I don't think you can just go in there and start making a challenge without, whenever they tell you something, go and check it. And then you can say, well, I read this, I read that, and you can say, okay, these things are what I found. But they are the two top scholars in this country in that area. And they, unlike Newt Gingrich and these others they put on TV, these are TV scholars, they put on television. And you cannot put them up there and have them saying anything behind what Mearsheimer says and what Jeffrey Sachs says. I want to say that before I get started because that must be made clear. They are the areas and they are the scholars in this area. And they're not going to disagree with what I'm saying here. They certainly not going to, certainly Sachs not disagree with me about the origination of this war between Russia and Ukraine, because Sachs is very much aware of the beginning point of this war. This war is not beginning with this. I don't have respect for this man, this Zelensky, this tyrant. They want to try to make him a Democrat, trying to make him a Winston Spencer Churchill. You got to be kidding! And putting his flag in the Congress of the United States. You should have impeached now you can impeach anybody in the House and the Senate based upon the Constitution, but they should have been recalled. by the people that sent them there. We didn't send you to Congress, you members of the Congress of the United States. We didn't send you there from these states for you to go there and supplant the American flag by putting another flag in the place of our flag. Man, don't get me started because I'm tempted to use some words here because you're not going to do that, and I don't say anything about it. You're not supposed to do that. And no country with people that respect its citizens and respect its flag and respect its constitution would do that, and you won't find another country doing it. No country would do that. Where you put a flag in your parliament. Do you see that anywhere else other than with these fools in this country? I've been in a lot of countries, and I have never seen that anywhere I've been. And I don't think I'll see it anywhere that I'll be in the future. I can't. It's unconscionable if you understand the gravity of that. It's egregious also for people to be kneeling when they're playing our national anthem. You can't do that. But I will tell you that the two scholars, in terms of those that are experts on what's happening in Europe and this war that's going on between Russia and Ukraine, really is a proxy war. It's really a war between the United States and Russia by way of NATO, and then through NATO and through this pipsqueak Vladimir Zelensky, who is a water boy. This man is carrying the water for NATO and carrying water for the United States. And if they were not in back of it, this war could not go forward. And this war would not have started if NATO had not provoked it. This war was provoked by NATO. And if you were paying attention to Biden and to Kamala Harris, I'm glad both of them are gone. But if you were paying attention to what they were saying, what they were doing was instigating the conflict by saying that by nibbling at the edges, saying that when Ukraine becomes a part of NATO, that would be the biggest mistake. But they were nibbling at that, even though they were not advocating that. They were making it seem like that was what they were itching toward. But if that happened, you'd be back to 1962 when Russia put those missiles in Cuba.
I don't know why people, if that part's missed on. They try to make like Zelensky and the Ukraine. Zelensky is a total innocent angel that Russia decided to attack. It's like if they're on our board, if they're the same landmass as we were during that time, we would have been going after the Cubans for the same thing, for bombing them.
And we'll do it today too.
Yeah, I mean,
we'll do it today too, John. If Russia puts missiles in Mexico and has Mexico's permission to do it, we are not going to tolerate it. And we didn't tolerate it, and that'd be next door. We didn't tolerate it 90 miles off the coast of Florida when those missiles were put in Cuba. And they were put in Cuba, let's be honest about this, they were put in Cuba because Castro knew that when he unveiled himself and showed that he was not what they thought they had supported when they supported him against Batista, Fulgencio Batista in Cuba, when they backed Castro against Batista and then helped him overthrow Batista in 1959, they didn't know what they were getting into because Castro had concealed himself. And when he got in there, then he showed the alliance with Khrushchev. And that's when they realized they had been duped. The CIA had been duped. And now they want him out of there because they got a communist government inside of the territorial claim made by James Monroe in 1823. You're not aware of that, but I'm just telling you what the claim was. The claim is really that the fiefdom of the United States is not just next door, it's not just Canada and Mexico, north and south, it's the entire Western Hemisphere. Maybe you have not read the Monroe Doctrine, the claims that's made in that doctrine by James Monroe, the fifth president of the United States in 1823. But the United States area of sphere of influence in the Western Hemisphere is the whole Western Hemisphere. And when Castro allowed those missiles to go into Cuba, which was a sovereign country, that was unconscionable to the United States because it was a violation against the territorial claims made in 1823 by James Monroe. We still make that claim today. You can't put missiles in the Western Hemisphere from a hostile country. It would not be tolerated. And yet they think that that Putin is supposed to tolerate them claiming NATO would go into that NATO would bring in Ukraine, which shares a south-west border on Russia's southwest border. Go get a map out and you'll see it, where you can begin to see what the claim is here. And Russia is not going to allow it. And they're willing to fight a war because if they allow that, then the encirclement of Russia is complete.
I think it's too. All these countries are yearning to get NATO. I mean, Ukraine join up with NATO. How much money are they going to go? It's going to be Americans outfitting them. Putting for all that. It's going to be That's who NATO is. It's us. It's our money. Nobody else gives hardly anything to it.
Yeah, and John, you're making a great point, and people need to understand the point you're making. You see, the reason why I'm a Trump supporter, but the reason I came out against anyone talking about Trump receiving the Nobel Peace Prize for peace is because Donald Trump does not deserve that. He deserves tremendous applause and respect for what he's doing on the domestic front. And he's been a voice out there to resolve some of the wars. For example, the thing that was going on in the Congo that started back there with Patrice Lumumba back in the 60s, when Lumumba was elected prime minister, and the Congo had in it Kasavubu and what's the other guy's name? Maurice Deshambe. And Lumumba had been duly elected the premier and prime minister of the Congo, and that was in fact interfered with and stopped. Yeah, you got it, by the CIA at that time. And Lumumba and Kasavubu were sick on Lumumba, who was the nationalist in that fight, and therefore was going against the Belgium interests at that point, because the Congo had been colonized by the Belgians. You can read that. I don't want to get too far myself, but you can read that in the poem where they were saying in the Harlem Renaissance period, they cut off my hands in the Congo, they lynched me still in Mississippi. They were talking about the Belgians were cutting off the hands of the Congolese to get control of the Congolese. But when they elected Lumumba, the CIA has a problem on his hand because they got those mineral resources down there and no longer control the resources, and that's why that upheaval occurred there. So yeah, Trump did resolve the problem that was longstanding. He did come in and get the two sides to come together. you saw them shaking hands across. There's Trump sitting down, and they got the two of them shaking hands and so on and so forth, because they had money on both sides. And these leaders not anything today, but they shook hands and decided that Rwanda and the Congo, now called Zaire, is not. They're gonna stop their fighting in Africa, and that's to be Donald Trump's credit. But the hard part is not that. Those 4 or 5, maybe 6 wars that Trump has been instrumental in engaging in to get the fighting stopped there, that's not the biggie. The biggie is the fighting that's going on in Ukraine. And Donald Trump has not resolved that problem. And the reason why he's not resolved it because Donald Trump is not able, I don't know where the power is coming from, but he's not able to go out there and say what needs to be said to get this war calmed down. And what he's not going to say to calm this war down, but to solve the problem overnight, if he would say that NATO has no further territorial ambitions into any part of Eastern Europe beyond where it is right now, has no claims of any, has no intent of bringing Ukraine into NATO, and if he says that, and they would not move further into Eastern Europe, that will resolve this problem overnight. Sachs agrees with me on that point, and so does John Mearsheimer, but I can say it because I studied the documents they studied. I'm not the expert in this area. I do not claim to be an expert in this area. They're the experts. But I don't trust the experts. I get leery about this word experts. But I have to say there, I've not found anyone that can top their expertise in this area here because I've checked behind them. And I have a lot of respect for both these men because they're not the partisan hacks that these scholars are camped out in these different places. And I don't trust any of them other than the ones that have become independent in their scholarship. Because once you start taking sides in your scholarly outlook and your conclusions, and you start drawing partisan conclusions, I don't trust your scholarship anymore. Because you can be guided despite your scholarship and make claims that your scholarship, in fact, confronts. But they're the two persons that would side with me on what I'm saying here. This war is a NATO war. And you don't have to go and read the documents I read and obviously more documents that they read. All you got to do is get a map out and then look at that map. That map has, that map says, well, first of all, the NATO nations that were the founding members of NATO in 1849, those 12 founding nations that were in fact coming together to stop what they thought would be the aggression, because Churchill had talked about the Iron Curtain was going up, and they were afraid of Russia going into Western Europe and the Iron Curtain being extended, and they got together, the countries on the North Atlantic got together and decided they're going to coagulate their military in an alliance called NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization they founded in 1949 to stop that movement that they felt was going to be going west. They had already divided up Berlin during World War II, where they had East Berlin and West Berlin. Somebody should go and read that by the way and look at that great speech that John F. Kennedy gave. Great speech that he gave when he said that some would say that they don't know the difference between communism and capitalism. These are not the exact words, but that's the point he's making. And then he says, but we had never had to build a wall to keep our people inside of our country. And those that say they don't know the difference between communism and capitalism, let them come to Berlin. It's a great speech. But that alliance was set up to stop that encroachment at that point in time. But that's not the problem today. They kept going further and further and further east. And these two gentlemen, John Mearsheimer and Jeffrey Sachs, go against the grain and are willing to say that. But I tell you what you have not seen. You've not seen them say it on television, because that's what you have going on here in terms of censorship, which is censorship by omission, not by commission. They just simply don't have them on the TV shows. You ever seen them on have you ever seen them on Sean Hannity's program? No, they keep bringing on their Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich doesn't know anything about this area. And who's that other one they bring on there? Now, if it's not Gingrich, it's some other person that selling these wolf tickets. They don't know anything about this area. The ones that are studying this area is John Mearsheimer. That's one of the top-notch scholars in that area. We're not in all the areas. You can't be a scholar in all the areas. There's too much to be learned. Your scholarship is in a specific area. You have other information. You're a scholar, so you have information in a number of areas. Because you can't come out with degrees and you don't have some studied view in other areas as well. But there's a particular area that you go into. That's how they give you the degree in the area that you're in. And so they have, I don't know, I don't know. Sachs is a scholar in economics, but the man has been advising governments on the economy in other parts of the world. They take his advice in Eastern European nations. Take his advice. They take his advice in other nations also. He's the man that's saying that Europe should have its own foreign policy, independent of the United States. I mean, that takes a lot of courage to say that. You're living in the United States and saying that Europe needs to have its own foreign policy. And it should be a foreign policy away from the foreign policy of the United States. It should have the independent foreign policy. That Europe should speak in its own voice. And he's saying that as a professor at Columbia University. And they have people that think this man is anti-American. I mean, I heard Piers Morgan interviewing. I saw Piers Morgan interviewing Sachs. He wanted to know, is there anything that you would say positive about your country? He's not talking against the country. He is not, the man is a patriot for saying the things he's saying about the country being wrong.
Well, the other thing is too, if you look at all the issues where America's in, is because we went and did somebody else's battles for them, and we carry the weight for them. That's what the problem is in America. We've done that. So if everybody looked up for their own interest and see where there's intersecting sections that actually can serve each other's interest, fine. But I think Sachs, I think he's right. Every leader of every country should look out for their people's own interest. I don't know.
That's the greatness of Trump before he got caught up in this nonsense about Ukraine and so on. This man shouldn't be calling for NATO to increase its budget. That 2% they were spending in their budget is enough for NATO to carry out its responsibilities. He wants to talk about 5%. That's the wrong move. NATO is not being threatened by Putin. I would have respected Trump in this area here if he had said we want to make NATO members pay their fair share of the dues already in place. They weren't even paying that. And he raises it to 5%. Why? Because they need because you're not gonna like this. Because they need, you see, this is a religion. And a religion does not need to have a God, but it needs to have a devil. All religions need to have a devil, and they need Russia because that gives them a way of siphoning off money as people are paying money into a till or a kitty and backing money out, to which the money goes where? Nobody knows. We don't know where this money is going, as they were paying Zelensky as a client of the United States. We don't know where that those billions of dollars this man has gotten from the United States Treasury. This man is, we don't know where that money is. A man has got mansions everywhere, paid for by the taxpayers, because the money is not managed once they give it out. But you can believe this: when it's given out, their kickbacks will come back to the givers. They're not. This is not Santa Claus, and they're giving it in our name at our expense, and they're the one making that decision because these people are criminals. That's what I'm telling you. And you better, somebody had better begin to listen to me when I'm speaking in the area that I'm in. But when they're speaking in the areas they're in, somebody had better start listening to these people that's off camera, because Mearsheimer not going to be on Sean Hannity. You can forget that. Not going to be on Mark Levine. Forget that. What are these other shows? Not going to be on any of them. And you never seen them on TV. They're not putting these persons on television. Have you seen Jeffrey Sachs except when he may be interviewed on by Piers Morgan or interviewed by some other program, maybe on Joe Rogan? Have you seen him on any of these? Have you seen him on Fox? What about on Newsmax, my favorite station now? Have you seen him on Newsmax? No, you haven't seen him on Newsmax. Not gonna have him on there. Not gonna do it, because that's a bridge too far to them being licensed by the FCC. And that's why there's a little bit of having to tote the water in order to be in good stead with those who are making the ultimate decision about your FCC licensing. And that's how they control it. You guys that got mad at me the other day for what I said about Al Sharpton, I'm going to say more about Sharpton as I write about him in some of my coming comments on Facebook, because I'm going after this guy. You can bank on that. But the reason I don't go after Sharpton, let Sharpton go up there on MSNBC BS, is because Sharpton is not going to say things that cross the line, their line, because Sharpton has a $5 million tax liability. And they use that as leverage to make sure that Trump toes the line. This man is a paid, advocate, and he knows that his tongue is tied, and that's why he doesn't. I tell you what he's not going to do. He's not going to come out there and say one thing positive about Donald Trump having cleaned up in 1 week. Took him really about 3 days to clean up the nation's capital. We can't have a capital where we have the most persons that are killed per 100,000, more than any capital in the world. We had 41 per 100,000 residents. The next country to us had 16 or 17 per 100,000. We were the laughing stock. Our capital was the most endangered capital of any capital in the world. And we up here talking about we are the greatest country in the world, and et cetera, and all these comments we're making without paying attention to how you're going to say that when you have no proof of that and you don't give any evidence of it. Every city in the country is unsafe. And they call in Chicago with this guy named Ron Johnson. This is a thug, a former social studies teacher, a failed social studies teacher who couldn't take the heat of the classroom and got out of there and ran into politics. Now he's a mayor of the city. If you can't run the classroom, you can't run the city. And they got this thug up here talking about he's going to prevent the people from cooperating with ISIS and the federal forces that are cleaned up the nation's capital, and they're fearful that he's going to come into their city and do the same thing and show that they're nothing but it's a mirage that these people are political leaders. he's pointing out this is a mirage. And don't give this Muriel Bowser too much credit over there in Washington, D.C. either, because they're saying that they say, oh, she should be given a lot of credit because she came out and commended the forces there that are in Washington that have brought about a downturn in the number of homicides. They haven't had a homicide in Washington since the takeover occurred, where Donald Trump put the federal forces of the authority he has in the Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution. He took that power under the Constitution to put those federal troops there. And nobody can claim that they don't have the federal authority to do that because it's not a city, it's a district. And since it's a federal district that you think you can make into a state by just simply declaring it, and don't realize that you got to have a constitutional amendment to do that because you got to retract Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution of the United States. I'm telling you that, and no scholar is saying that, but that's the honest to gospel truth. You're not going to watch the... Okay, it's not, look, Bowser is no hero for having come out and said, clapping for the fact, what is she going to do? She got to fall in line and act like, and here's what she's doing. She had to fall in line and applaud Trump to act like that's the train that she was on to ride, but just didn't have the resources. When the fact is that Bowser should not be out here being credited for jumping on Trump's train, because what else could she have done? The man is cleaning up Washington, D.C. We can all see it. The contrast is too great. So she acts, what she's doing is acting like this is the train that she was always on, but just didn't have the resources. But this is not true, that this woman was in fact allowing the killing to go on in her city, just like Johnson is allowing it in Chirac, they call it. Chicago is called Chirac because it's just as dangerous in Chicago as in Iraq. For the American soldiers, it's more dangerous in Chicago for those civilians as it was for those soldiers in Iraq, and they call it Chirac. And they're afraid that if Donald Trump comes in there, he'll do in Chicago, Chirac, what he did in Bowser. But Bowser had no choice in the matter but to applaud what Trump is doing because they see the contrast. And if she had come out and said anything against it, they could see here this woman had no intent of cleaning that up. But how do you, in fact, go against it when the contrast is such that they know this man is cleaning up that town? We see the numbers have gone down. The homicide hadn't had one. And Trump is now saying what I think is a major, if they ever get this in place, then I'll say that we are becoming a serious country. And that is you take a life, by you taking a life, you forfeit your own life. That's the point that Ayn Rand was making, by the way. There's a point to be made. If you take someone's life, you have forfeited the right to your own life. And now that Trump is talking about making, in the Capitol, making murder a capital crime in the national capital, I don't know if they want to go down that road too much. Not now, not under this administration. And that just shows that it's not hard to clean these cities up. But you don't recognize, and what you don't get is that by allowing these cities, the urban cities, to be out of control like they are. This is another example of the soft expectation. What do they call it? It's the soft underbelly of racial bigotry, where they don't expect anything other than this, and it's to be tolerated because they can't do any better, right? Because people have expected the violence to be in these areas where there are this citizenry in place and not another citizenry in place. So in Washington, D.C., for example, in that nation's capital, you can go into the nation's capital and it's violence. Then you go into Georgetown, there's no violence. Just across town because it's tolerated. It is to be expected they would be acting that way. If you license anything, you get more of it. You get more of it. You license the violence in Chicago, and Chicago's out of control as a result of it. You license in New York, and you do that in any of these blue cities and states. Because if you license it, you get more of it. You know, they had a situation now that happened in South Dakota. I forget exactly the incident that occurred there. I think it might have been over the George Floyd thing. And this one guy thought, "Oh, it's going to be some free stuff now," and he decided he's going to jump the gun in South Dakota, where Noem, Christian Noem, was the governor at that time, and that guy jumped the gun and thought he's going to just go off and start to uh, lead the free stuff parade in South Dakota, and ran up against Christian Noem's leadership, and they got him right away. And as a result of that, took a strong stand against it at the outset, and that was put out. That little fire they were trying to build in South Dakota, that went out real quick because she didn't license it to go out of control like they've done in these other places. But you have to understand this: in those other places, they go out against it in the blue cities and so on and so forth. They're going out against their constituency because that's their constituency that's out there. And that's why those blue states and blue cities are out of control, because they have to depend upon that constituency to maintain power. You go and look in Minnesota. See, people were surprised. I could have told you ahead of time. You come and ask. I could have told you ahead of time that Ilhan Omar is not going to run for any senatorial position in Minnesota. She's not. Because people think that she's big in Minnesota because she's big in her district. Her district is made of people who are Somalis. She's nothing outside of that district. And if she runs for anything on the state level, she loses automatically because her reach is the district that she's elected from, and her outreach stays in that district. Her district is made up of Somalis. Because we are still carving the country up. When people get here, they carve the country up because they go to where their country has set up. Frankenmuth, I was telling you earlier, that's Bavarian Inn. You ever heard of Bavarian Inn? Go over there in Germany, you'll see it. And Zenders. Go into Hamtramck up until the time where it began to change and so on and so forth. But Hamtramck was Polish. And you can go and see other parts of the country like that. There are some places right now in Michigan, Detroit area, for example, that you have a lot of people coming from Africa, and they come there and they hit the ground running because they come there from a certain part of Africa. Not all of the ones coming there in that part that they're in is from all parts of Africa. From their parts in Detroit, from Senegal, where I'll be for a while in next year in 26. I'll be there for about a week. But when they come, the Senegalese are a force, an economic force in Detroit, but they don't go all over Michigan. They congregate in a certain part of it and make that work for that constituency. They people together. That's what people do. They go and create their nation, recreate their nation. But you don't bring your flag over here. And they don't do that they don't do that because they're not here for that. They're not here to make an indictment. They're here to make money. And a lot of it, they're quietly sending it back home and building their houses up by the income they get here. But they're going back home eventually. They're going back. They're not going to be in a cemetery here in the United States. They're gonna be in a cemetery in their homeland, and that's what they're doing. But when they come here, I have lived among them. I know how they think. And I tell my friend, I travel with a friend of mine when I go to Africa I think I missed 1 year since 2006. I've been in Africa every year except one from 2006 to 2025, and I'll be there again in 2026. I already bought the ticket, so I know I'll be going. I'm not going to be losing my money by not going. But I live among them. I live among them when I go to these countries, and I will tell you. And I told my friend, we are not them. We're not them. If anybody thinks they're gonna just pick up and go back and you're gonna find Kunta Kinte, and nothing has happened and nothing has changed, and 300 years of removal between that time period and so on, I would just tell you to go look at that film called Amistad, and then look at the end of credits of that film when they're showing you that this guy who had been changed, his name was Singbei, but they call him Sinkyu, were trying to act like he had been these person on that had risen against that boat and caused the mutiny. They were trying to act like they were Spaniards. You know, they were these were Spaniards that they had were fleeing from. So they were making the claim that they were here under that colonial arrangement. They were from the Western Hemisphere. And you saw the movie where they went and they found somebody that could speak Singbei, to speak the let's see, what's that language in not in Senegal, but in the one next door in, I don't know why I'm getting a mental block. I know it very well. Well, you get a blanking on this. But from Sierra Leone. Why am I getting a block on that? From Sierra Leone. Sinbad was from Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone is named based upon the sound of the mountains in that country, because when the wind is blowing, it sounds like the lion when a lion is roaring, and so Sierra Leone means the mountains that roar, or the mountains of the lions. Lions, Sierra Leone, the land of the land of the lion. However you want to put it, something about the mountains of the land of the lions. Although that is not lions there. Well, there's some lions, but it's basically talking about the sound, the roar that you hear, the sound those mountains make, and so it was named that. But go back and look at that film called Amistad, and when he went back in 1841, and he'd only been gone. They'd been kidnapped after the slave trade had been ended by the British. The British ended their slave trade and ended slavery in 1831, and we ended the slave trade here in 1808 by Article 1, Section 9. They had to wait 20 years before they could do it because it was restrained. They were restrained from doing it in our Constitution by them bringing slave states into the alliance to build the country, and they had to give them something to entice them to come in and join the union. So they put in there Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution of the United States. But then it did not allow them to move against slavery for 20 years. But once that 20-year period had passed, which was from 1787 to 1807, that following year, the founders, and who were still alive and still guiding the country, passed a prohibition against the slave trade the very year when it's allowed by that agreement had been made at the Constitutional Convention. You're not aware of that because you want to talk about them as slave owners. Yeah, there were some slave owners, but they brought them in for a larger reason. And you don't throw. You have to learn how to do this. But to the brilliance of our framers, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But it did not keep them having 17 to 19 of the signs of the Declaration of Independence. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And 17 of the 17 to 19 members of the signs of the Declaration of Independence were slave owners, but they still put in there, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. That's greatness, folks. And when I mentioned greatness in my article today about the framers, I did not want anybody to interpret me as saying perfect or any of that. Okay, we're running out of time again. But this is NATO's war. I'm right in saying that, and I'm copying, not copying, but I am agreeing with the two experts. John Mearsheimer is definitely one of them, and one I think that's in the same, if not above, but in the same ballpark at the plate after the other person's been at the plate will be there doing the cleanup, and that's Jeffrey Sachs. And they will tell you this is a NATO war because NATO has been encroaching further and further east, and Russia is not going to allow Ukraine to be a threat on its border and aligning it with NATO. Not if you understand NATO has promised to come to the aid of all NATO members. And what this does by them stopping NATO from putting Ukraine in there, it stops the war because if they get in there and Ukraine is a problem and you attack Ukraine under those circumstances, they are bound by the agreement, by the NATO agreement, to come to the rescue of all NATO members. You attack one, you're attacking all of them. So in a way, this is a way of putting out the fire and the flame of a possible World War III. But if they go into NATO, it ensures it and brings it closer. And that clock that is going toward 12 o'clock, it was 17 minutes before 12, maybe when Trump became president, and it went down to, I forget how many minutes it was. You know how they say the clock it's closer to 12 o'clock now than it was then. And we need to move that clock back to at least 17 minutes because it gives you enough time to have some time to negotiate. But but this is not NATO's. This is not Russia's war. This is not Putin's war. This is NATO's war, and it comes out of the aggression of NATO moving further and further and further east. And we need Trump to step up and say what needs to be said. That NATO will not move further east. Guarantee that, and then they will in fact not put Ukraine into NATO, and that will resolve this problem. And then if he says that, and if he does that, then Trump deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. Until he does that, he does not deserve it. And I'm a Trump supporter and saying it. Okay, I finally got through what I wanted to say a couple of weeks ago, and I had to say it this time. Hope you got some out of it. Okay, we got to get out of here. Hope you had a nice time in your celebration of Labor Day. You're back to work tomorrow. Do a good job where you are. Until next week, I want you to follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.